This is Anthony Morganti. Welcome to my podcast, For the Joy of Photography. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. Have you ever looked at a famous photographer's work and thought to yourself, why is this person even famous? There's nothing special about these images. Well, I recently had this conversation with another photographer, and I thought it would make for an interesting topic for our podcast. Now, this podcast is the last podcast of 2018, and to tell you the truth, it's going to be rather short because there's really not a lot to talk about here. I'm going to offer my opinion about why some photographers are considered famous, when in fact, if you really take a close look at their work, technically, it probably isn't very difficult. And the reason why I had this conversation with this other photographer is he was telling me that he saw a video by a relatively famous YouTube photography teacher who mentioned, I believe he said, got a book on the photographer Diane Arbus. And by the way, her name is pronounced Diane, not Diane. Even though it's pronounced Diane, she preferred to use Diane. Anyway, this person got a book on Diane Arbus's work, and they mentioned in their video that they weren't very impressed with Diane Arbus's work. They thought it was really probably just snapshots. And the guy I was talking to, he agreed with that YouTube photographer teacher, and he wanted to know my opinion. Well, I asked him to send me a link to that video so I could see what that guy actually said. And he hasn't sent me the link to that video, so that's why I'm not mentioning that person's name, this photography YouTube guru, because I don't want to misrepresent what he's saying, because I want to see it for myself, and I don't want to say he's saying one thing and he didn't say that. He said something else. So let's just assume that he did say that the work, at least of Diane Arbus, is really just snapshots. And I think what all of us really should do when we evaluate a photographer's work, especially if we're looking and we're new to a photographer who's famous and we're looking at their work, we have to keep in mind when the work was done. In the case of Diane Arbus, she was doing what people called she was taking pictures of what people called people living on the fringe. She was called the photographer of freaks. Now, I don't know if she felt this way, but I know if I wouldn't like that label. I wouldn't like anyone calling the subjects of my photography freaks. But at the time when Diane Arbus was taking these images, it was the late 60s through the 70s in the United States, and she was taking images of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer people. She was taking pictures of biracial marriages. She was taking pictures of people that had tattoos from head to toe. She was taking pictures of little people. So she was taking pictures of mentally disabled people. So she was doing a lot of pictures that you didn't see in mainstream media. That would be magazines of the day. You didn't see these on magazine racks at the checkout counter of the grocery store. You didn't see it on primetime television. These were people that were pretty much ignored by society at that time. So she broke new ground. And I think that is part of the reason why her work is appreciated today. And those of you that are watching the video, I'm just going to be paging through some pictures and you'll get an idea what I mean. She was, you know, circus freaks, you know, guys with stick pins and nails in their skin and things like that. She took photos of these types of people. And as I mentioned, this wasn't seen by America at that time. You didn't, the average housewife in Des Moines who isn't anywhere near, let's say, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, or Los Angeles, isn't maybe used to seeing a bisexual person, a trans person, a cross-dresser, doesn't see biracial couples. And Diane Arbus is doing this, you know, she's seeking out these people and taking their pictures. Now, as the YouTube photography guru mentioned, they are pretty much snapshots. They're really just people she puts right in front of her camera and they're looking right at the camera and she takes their picture. Sometimes she'll use on-camera flash, but much of the time she doesn't. She's just taking a picture of these people. So again, you have to keep in mind the time she's doing it and the subject matter. And I think that's what makes her work famous and makes her a famous photographer. I think what adds to it too, as far as Diane Arbus is concerned, is she did commit suicide relatively young. I think she was maybe 47, 48 years old. So I think that adds to her mystique as well. But again, it's mainly the subject matter and the time she did it. Now, the same thing happened today. It probably wouldn't be as unusual because it's, more seen today. People have seen these things. So, I think that's why she's fairly well known. Now, I consider Diane Arbus a photographer who has been recognized in the world of art. Now, the next person we're going to talk about is Cindy Sherman. I consider Cindy Sherman an artist who uses photography in their art. In postmodernism, often an artist will use photography or multimedia like video in their art. And I believe Cindy Sherman is an artist who uses photography. And if you just casually look at her images, they don't look like anything super special, just kind of snapshots. But let's look at the time frame. Cindy Sherman was late 70s, early 80s. And Cindy Sherman, at that time, we're kind of, now this was before the internet, but at that time, it was actually called kind of the plugged-in society, especially in the United States, in that just about everyone in the U.S. had a television, and we could see movie stars, people. We got the news immediately, or at least at 6 o'clock every night. The news, we were able to go to the supermarket, and in the checkout line, there were all these magazines and all these photographs. And women in the late 60s, early 70s were starting to really come into the workforce, and women's liberation was a thing. And Gloria Steinem and was demanding that women be paid, the same as men and be treated the same as men. So that all happened a little bit before Cindy Sherman, but then when she came in, now everyone is, has this kind of image of the modern woman, let's put it that way. And what Cindy Sherman did, which was different than anyone else, is she was not only the photographer, but she was the model, and she was the makeup artist, and she was the wardrobe artist, and she was the hairdresser and the stylist. And she created an image of a woman that you might see on a billboard, or you might see on the side of a bus in an advertisement, or you might see in primetime television, or might see in the movie theater. And all these women were just conjured up in her mind. And if you go and look at her images, you'll notice that some are really elaborate and almost hyper real, not like a person you'd see walking down the street, but others are very mundane, just like a woman you might see, in the supermarket. And she had a number of different series. I think her two most famous series, one was called the Film Still series, and she kind of tried to emulate a film still, something that would be in a movie. And a lot of people would look at something like this and they go, oh, I've seen that movie. And it really isn't a real movie. It's just something that she conjured up in her brain and is presenting to you. So her work is a little more esoteric than Diane Arbus's work. Again, I think because Cindy Sherman is an artist who is using photography. And again, you have to take in the time frame. No one else was doing this. So she kind of was breaking new ground. And she's the one, she did everything from, as I mentioned, and she, I don't know, she just, I guess, I don't know, I'm fighting for words to try to describe it because sometimes art is difficult to describe. Her other series was called a sex picture series. Again, for the time, not something that anyone else has ever done. So, Diane Arbus, a photographer who is accepted into the world of art and recognized in the world of art. Cindy Sherman, in my opinion, is an artist who uses photography in her art. Now, the next couple guys we're going to talk about, you might get the feeling that I like Diane Arbus's work and I like Cindy Sherman's work, and that is true. The next two guys, I don't care for their work as much. It doesn't mean their work isn't great. It's just my opinion. And I did mention a kind of a throwaway comment in one of my previous videos that the work of Stephen Shore, I think my exact words is, I just don't get it. Well, I actually do understand it. I just don't really like it that much. Stephen Shore takes the mundaneness of life and he just records it to film. And when I say the mundaneness of life, what I mean by that is it's just a picture of the ground with some garbage there and a couple bottles. It's the street corner with a boarded up storefront and a street light and a street sign. There's a yellow line going down the middle of the road with cars parked on the side of the road and buildings on either side. There's, again, another street corner with street lights and a tree and a building. There's gas station on the corner with power lines and street lights. I mean, that's it. It's stuff that we pass by every single day and never notice. So you're on your way to work and you're passing by a couple gas stations and a McDonald's and a street signs, and you're passing by traffic lights and street lights, and you're not even noticing it, and you do it day in and day out. Well, Stephen Shore notices it, and he takes these pictures of these things. And it's really just the mundaneness of life. And it's he's become very, very famous for it. As a matter of fact, this past spring, my son and I were in the New York Museum of Modern Art at one of his exhibitions. And we were looking at these very images of just power lines and, the backs of car, he's driving down the street, he's at a red light, and he puts the camera out the window and takes a photograph of the car in front of him. Stuff like that. It's really, to me, not that compelling, but apparently, in the world of art, it's interesting. And again, I think he was probably the first one in the United States to ever do this. I think in the United Kingdom, there were a few guys that were doing it before him. But as far as the United States is concerned, I think he was the first photographer to do this. And I would consider Stephen Shore a photographer who is recognized in the world of art. All right. Now, the next guy I'm going to talk about is very similar to Stephen Shore, and he's one of those guys from the United Kingdom that I think probably was doing this a little bit before Stephen Shore, or maybe around the same time, I don't know. And that is Martin Parr. Martin Parr has a number of different types of images, and they're really, most of them concern the mundaneness of life again. And the one I'm kind of showcasing, those of you that are watching the video, is his series called British Food. It's really just snapshots of plates of food. And pretty much it. I mean, a British breakfast, beans, cakes and stuff. And really, you could go on Instagram and find images that, I don't mean this in an insulting way to Martin Parr. I'm just trying to give you an idea what this is you could go on Instagram, though, and you could probably find images by, a teenager of their food that they got at Applebee's that might be technically a better picture than these. But again, Martin Parr was probably the first person to ever take pictures of food and make it into a series called British Food. So that brought him notoriety. And again, I would probably consider Martin Parr a photographer who is accepted and appreciated in the world of art, in my opinion. And again, nothing really special about these images. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is when you evaluate or you look at a photographer's work, you not only, it's easy to look at Diane Arbus and say those are snapshots, or it's easy to look even at Stephen Shore and Martin Parr, those are snapshots. But you have to take the context of when it was done and what was done with it, as far as the work of Cindy Sherman, of how it really is art that was conjured up in her brain that she is creating. And it's not just the press of the shutter as far as Cindy Sherman is concerned. It's all the other stuff, the setting up of the scene, the makeup, the wardrobe, and all that other stuff that she's doing. So whether or not you consider them significant, or whether or not you think they're great photographers or great artists, that's, very subjective. Personally, just to let you know, I really do like Diane Arbus's work, and I really do like Cindy Sherman's work. I wish I could afford a Cindy Sherman print. Cindy Sherman prints probably sell for 5-6 figures. As a matter of fact, I think she sold an image for over $1 million. I think she's one of the few photographers, or artists, I guess, that would sell a print for over $1 million. Diane Arbus's work, I'm sure, I haven't priced it, but I'm sure it's super expensive. And Stephen Shore and Martin Parr, I'm sure their work costs, a ton too. But I think, it's kind of a whole side of photography, I guess, maybe a lot of us don't really visit. We're out there, we're doing either, portraits, or we're out doing landscapes, or we're just taking pictures of flowers and maybe animals, things like that. And those have their own technical issues that have to be overcome, that sometimes those technical issues are way more difficult than any of these 4 people deal with their photography or their art. And that's what we do. But I wanted to give you an idea where I guess these people might be coming from, and others. There's a ton of other photographers that you could look at and not really appreciate their work unless you put it, accept it into the time frame it was done, and whether or not it was breaking new ground and something different and new for that time. So, short podcast to finish off our year, 2018. Just, thank you everyone that has supported me for the few years I've been doing this. I really do appreciate it. I hope the podcasts improve. I know I kind of started my way through them, but I hope to have the podcast improve in 2019 and eventually have other people on with me. So that way I'm not here just blabbing away for, 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Thank you for watching my podcast, For the Joy of Photography. Remember, stop by my website, onlinephotographytraining.com. There you'll find all my latest videos and articles to help you improve your photography. That's it for now. I'll talk to you guys soon.